Paramjit Bhai, please unmute.
Om Shanti. A very good evening to everyone, and welcome to the Brahma Kumaris regular Friday talk hosted by Brahma Kumaris Leicester and Harrow. And we'd like to sort of pay a special thank you to all those who've joined on Zoom, YouTube, Facebook, and other media platforms. And today we really have a very distinguished speaker. Sister Denise is always a sought-after speaker, and the topic is so appropriate. What is a guilty conscience? And Denise, Ben, has been practicing Raj Yoga for nearly 50 years. It's amazing. 50 years must have gone but today she comes and joins us all the way from the south of France. So welcome, Sister Denise.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
So what's the weather like there at the moment?
Well, it's about probably around 29, 30 degrees. It's warm, sunny, breezy, and very nice. South of France is supposed to be like this, and there's always wind, so you don't feel overly hot.
Well, I'm always waiting in anticipation of what you have to say, because I do enjoy your daily broadcasts that I hear on YouTube, and your depth and breadth is amazing, absolutely amazing. So I hand it over to you, Sister Denise.
Well, thank you very, very much, Brother Paramjit. So this is a very interesting topic, because I have not ever heard anybody give as a topic, what is a guilty conscience? And so, of course, I've been thinking about it for quite a while, and thinking that in different languages, the word conscience is translated very approximately. They don't seem to agree too well. Like, for example, in Hindi, conscience is vivek, but the way vivek is used is like intelligence, how we use intelligence in English sometimes. And in French, I'm in France here, so in France they call it la conscience morale, the moral conscience. And then, according to me, conscience and morality are not the same thing at all. So I think that we can see from the use of language that it's really quite unclear as to exactly what a conscience is. I think it's reasonable to say that everyone has one. It's rather like the mind. Everybody has a mind, but you've never seen it. You don't know what it looks like. You don't really know how it operates. And you have something on your mind, in your mind. Someone may be out of their mind. Someone may be off their rocker. And there's so many different phrases that we use to refer to processes within the consciousness that are like this word guilty conscience. People use it, but I don't think any of the people who use it actually know what it means or what they mean by it. So I would like to analyze it a little bit and see if we can arrive at a conclusion that we may agree on. Maybe we won't. But let's look at the word guilt. And in law, in British law, United States law, most of the legal systems, you're presumed innocent until you are proven guilty. But in practicality, a lot of people find that they're assumed to be guilty of whatever they're accused of, and then they have to figure out some way to prove their innocence, and if they don't succeed, then they will be condemned, punished, and all that. So the word guilt is very much connected with punishment, and it's also connected with the word justice. And when we think about the word justice, anyone who is studying spirituality in the context of India is very aware about karma philosophy. But as far as I can tell, people have a lot of different ideas about what karma philosophy is, and that is the case even among people who are studying it quite intensively. And people make many assumptions about justice, about karma, about conscience, about guilt. And these assumptions are on the basis of your social environment. So the way you're raised, which means your family, your culture, and your religious environment. So depending on the religious environment and cultural environment, people will use the word guilty conscience in connection with inducing in others to feel guilty. And this is actually very counterproductive, very psychologically damaging, but very common. And there are a lot of people who believe that you make people good by assaulting them verbally or physically and giving them a very hard time. This is a very strange kind of behavior, because any research in such things has always arrived at conclusion that this absolutely doesn't work. But yet people believe it works, and when they find it doesn't work, they will maybe, apply different kinds of physical violence or force more strongly to get it to work. And this is because of these preconceptions and beliefs. So this word guilty conscience, let's see whether it's actually possible for a conscience to be guilty. And it's difficult to determine that, because we have to first of all clarify what a conscience is and whether it is an object. And if it's an object, then can an object be guilty, because can an object do something? And if it's not an object, then it must be a person. And is there a person which is a conscience? Is a person a conscience? If a person is a conscience, then why don't we call them a conscience? A person can perform an action, and that action could be acceptable in a particular community where that person is, or unacceptable, which doesn't really have much to do with whether that action is right or wrong, because rightness and wrongness of an action is decided by the leaders of communities. They may be religious leaders, political leaders, cultural leaders, and they decide about what's right and wrong. And the legal systems are derived from religious law, and religious law is derived from the people who figured out the religions. And the founders of the religions did not do that. It was other people who did that later on. So behind this idea of a guilty conscience is, how do you know whether something is right or wrong? So in terms of spiritual investigation, the word conscience comes up as being part of the human soul. And the human soul is understood to be the one who performs action. And so the person is a soul. And so the soul performs good or bad action. And there are some spiritual laws that apply to this, which are not the same as the legal system. Sometimes they are, but sometimes they're not. So there's a lot of disagreement about that. Now, how is this word conscience applying to the soul, you see? Because you could say that the soul has instruments for calculating whether something is right or wrong. And I would say that the conscience is one of those instruments. So in terms of the study that we do in Brahma Kumaris, we would say that the conscience and the intellect is the same thing. So the intellect is understood to be that part of the soul which can know the difference between something and something else. It knows the difference between whether an instruction is likely to work or not. If you're making a cake or something, the intellect can calculate and evaluate. And so in terms of rightness and wrongness, there are descriptions of what is right and wrong that people of a particular community go along with. And then they don't usually check it out as to whether it's really right or wrong. They just accept it because that's what they learn. And then in many situations, the conscience, which is like an inner voice that lets you know whether what you're doing is right or wrong, may be in alignment with the prevailing social attitudes about rightness and wrongness, or it may not. And the problem with this discrepancy is that prevailing social attitudes are based on religious concepts about what a human being is. And the main problem is that religions tend to define people as they're either males or females. And biology does that too, and the government also does that. And so almost all societies divide people into males and females, and the laws that apply to females are different from the laws that apply to males. And the laws are generally biased against females and in favor of males. And so this tends to be called a patriarchal system. Now, spirituality has said that actually this is faulty because a person is not male or female. A person has a male or female body which, when you leave your body and die, then you get reborn in the other type. So if you look at all the different rebirths that a person may have, you will find that it's 50% male and 50% female. So you really cannot apply laws to someone who is 50% male and 50% female if the laws are biased in favor of one type and against the other type. So it doesn't make any sense, which means that the intellect, the conscience, doesn't work right there. And this is because of perception. So in spiritual literature, one very interesting thing is said, and that is that what you see is not the same as what's really there. And so if you base your calculation on the basis of what you see, your calculation is likely to be wrong. And so when you apply that to a human being, what you see is a male or a female body. And then further than that, bodies come in different colors, all the way from quite pale to quite dark. And then you get added biases. Generally, the legal system is biased against if you have a dark skin, and for if you have a pale skin, and on and on and on. There are lots of different kinds of biases which people have bought into and been conditioned to. And so the conscience and these prevailing ideas very often come into conflict. And so a person may be doing a right action, but in their society, they are perceived by the others as having violated a belief about whether that action is right or wrong. So it may be a right action, but everybody thinks it's a wrong action. So they will force that person to assume a mentality of guilt. And they will tell that person, you have a guilty conscience. I can see it written all over your face. And like this, they will do that to each other. And this is one kind of abuse that people do, thinking that it's a very good idea. So all these things, when you multiply them and you take it from generation to generation, it all produces a lot of human suffering. And people do actions which they believe are right, but which are actually wrong, and then they pay for them in some form of suffering, because the laws of karma are something that you cannot legislate about. They're like the laws of physics. You can't all of a sudden say, okay, we're not going to have gravity this week. And that's not going to work. In the same way, there are laws. We can call them laws of spirituality, and they are incontrovertible. They cannot be changed. They need to be discerned, but most people have a difficult time doing that because of the prevailing ideas that are derived from their religious and social environment. So what is a guilty conscience? According to that analysis, it is something fabricated, something false. And so I think my conclusion about it is that there is no such thing as a guilty conscience, and we should delete this expression from the English language. But that's not so easy, because people just use it anyway, whatever I think about it or say about it. Let's go further. It is a reality that people use the word guilt to refer to their feelings when it isn't clear whether what they're feeling and what they want and what they're doing is right or wrong. For example, someone may have bought into a belief that if people have more than other people, there's something wrong with that, because everybody's equal, so therefore you should have the same as everybody else. So then if somebody gets more money or more opportunities, they say, I feel guilty because I got more than the other person, and maybe it's not fair. So this idea of guilt and justice is used in the context of faulty logic, faulty philosophy, and then people get really quite confused. So I think that study of spiritual matters is really important, because you can analyze all these ideas that everybody subscribes to and determine whether they are real or not. And once you have actually clarified for yourself that a prevailing idea is absolute nonsense, then it cannot have any power over you, because you'll know that it's nonsense. And so it doesn't have the ability to make you feel something that is supposed to be real, but which isn't real because there isn't any foundation for it, but it's imposed or projected onto another person by a group, say, and they are made to feel wrong, even though they're not actually wrong. And so this is a big human mystery. But when you study spirituality, it's not so much of a mystery. You realize that people just are very limited because they don't have enough information, and then they draw conclusions that are based on faulty logic, and then they push it on everybody, and the people go along with it. But you don't have to once you have greater clarity. So to extract yourself from these things is not so easy, and it takes a lot of time and energy and effort and focus and attention and analysis, and not very many people are ready and willing to do it unless they are very interested in it, which is what I am, very, very interested in the philosophy of ideas, and which is called moral philosophy. And morality is not really a good source of information about whether something's right or wrong, because morality is a Latin-based word meaning the opinion of the majority. So the opinion of the majority is the basis of what we call democracy. And the opinion of the majority is based on a lot of traditions and education, which is designed to make a person believe something on the basis of strong leadership, which says this is the way it is and this is what you have to believe, and if you don't agree with it, you will be punished. And so they have to, or they have to be an outcast or ostracized. So the social pressures on this are really quite extreme, because it varies from individual to individual, from community to community, but on the whole, it's a pretty strong influence. And to be free and independent is a big piece of work. So, a guilty conscience. There isn't such a thing, a guilty conscience. So I cannot answer the question, what is a guilty conscience? Because there isn't one. But feeling guilty when you do something wrong means that the conscience will give you a signal to let you know that what you did is wrong, what you're about to do is wrong, what you are in the middle of doing is wrong. So the conscience is a signaling device from within your soul that warns you that this is not a good idea, don't do it, or this is a good idea, you must do it. And the conscience of most people is not working very well. And I would like to tell you why the conscience isn't working very well. And you can check this for yourselves as I'm talking about it. Just ask yourself, in the last week, how many times do you remember doing something or saying something or thinking something that was against your conscience? When I ask people this, most people say, yeah, quite a few times. They don't want to say how many times, because it's quite a lot. And why does a person disregard this ultra reliable internal mechanism of the soul, the conscience. Why would you disregard it? And there are a number of reasons. One is that the conscience lets you know, okay, this is the right thing to do, to say, to think, so go ahead and do it. But the social environment says, no, 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 this is the wrong thing. And if you do it, we will punish you. And so people go against their conscience because they are afraid of being punished. And they may be punished just by people looking at them in a certain way or talking about them in a certain way, making them feel guilty as far as they can to force them to agree with their idea about what's right and wrong. And there is where this idea of guilty conscience comes up. And so they are telling you that your conscience is telling you the wrong thing, therefore you are a bad person. And this is totally, completely mindless, faulty logic. But yet, people who are otherwise considered highly intelligent, social leaders, they do this. So what can we do? What can we say? Now, go back to your own self and your relationship with your own conscience. Okay, you go against the voice of conscience partly because of fear, and partly because you want to be accepted, you want to be considered important, good, you want to be approved of, you don't want to be ostracized, all these various reasons, which actually are signs of character weakness. So if you have a weakness of character, you will go against your conscience. And then what happens when you go against the voice of conscience on a daily basis, several times a day, and look at how old you are. If you are 50 years old, how many days are there in 50 years? Quite a lot. You go against your conscience again, 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 what's going to happen? Your voice of conscience will say, sorry, I'm not going to talk to you because you don't listen, so you're on your own. I'm going out of here. And so your conscience actually becomes dysfunctional because you disregarded it so much. And then when you need it, it's not there for you. And then you don't have any way to find out whether what you are planning to do or thinking about doing or actually doing, you don't know whether it's right or wrong. So then you are forced to consult an external moral authority. And this is where the problem comes, because the external moral authority has decided what's right or wrong, regardless of what's actually right or wrong. It may be very convenient for that external moral authority to make you wrong as to their advantage. And then because you consulted them, then they will tell you this is right, this is wrong, do this, don't do that. And you come under their influence, you are beholden to them, and you have betrayed your own self. So once you start looking at it like this, it becomes a really very important issue for a person. Now, another thing that happens very much to people is that from childhood onwards, the majority of people experience different kinds of trauma. Trauma in the family, emotional trauma, social trauma, economic trauma, many different kinds of trauma. And when you have been traumatized, especially as a child, by an adult who is a moral authority, this will destroy your ability to of your conscience to function. because you were wounded in the conscience by someone who misbehaved with you as an adult. It could have been physical assault, sexual assault, all these type of things that do happen a great deal. And then a person is badly wounded in the soul and especially in the conscience. And this causes all sorts of consequences that psychiatrists and psychologists try to deal with, but not usually very successfully. So, these are terrible things that happen to human beings because we are going through dark times. And then the question arises, is it possible to repair a broken, damaged, dysfunctional conscience? And I think that it is possible. But in order to repair a conscience, you have to start following it always. Because if you follow the voice of conscience, then it will start to talk to you very well and clearly. But that means that you have to be willing to be alone, because the social environment will be against you. And how many people are willing to do that? Very, very few. And those people will always be treated somewhat improperly because they're not towing the line. And so it takes somebody who's really very heroic and a person of great integrity, and these are hero quality beings. And of course, there's not very many. But yet, I think everyone really wants to be the best person they can be, and to tell yourself, okay, the very best person I can be is going to happen when I start listening carefully to my own conscience and following it and being willing to face the consequences. And if you do that judiciously and wisely, not in a an unwise way. You can do this wisely or unwisely, but it's important to do it wisely. And you have to be able to stand up for your convictions, and you need the courage of your convictions. You need to be willing to face ridicule, being mocked, being pushed out, whatever it happens to be. But there's also a spiritual law which says that, if you really are a person who follows the voice of conscience and you're very concerned to perform right action and be right with yourself and right with the Supreme Being and interact with people according to your principles, they will give you respect ultimately. They may not to start with, but ultimately they really will. But you do have to go through a lot of trials to achieve that kind of position in other people's minds, because it's a strong, strong energy, the energy of morality, even though it's not really correct, but it's strong. And if you want to be correct according to your conscience and right with yourself, and just carry on like that, and people will see how you are somebody who stands up for what you believe is right, and that you do listen to the voice of conscience. The they have a right to test you, you know, because if you're really a strong person of integrity, that's really what people are looking for, but they don't trust. And so they have to test you as far as possible, because if you can pass all the tests and hold yourself to your integrity, then all good things will come to you, and people will hold you in really very, very high regard. So it means you have to think for yourself, you have to evaluate for yourself, and obviously the voice of conscience will speak to you, but at the same time, you may say, okay, but I have to check, I have to think, I have to make sure that I have all the necessary information so that I can make a right decision. And so you have to be a deep thinker. Sometimes there are decisions you have to make on the spot and there's no time to think. But when your conscience is working well, you get an immediate signal, immediate. And this is really valuable because there are many, many occasions where you just have less than a second to decide. And when your relationship with your conscience is really good, it will always be there for you. You will just know what's the right thing and you will do it. So you're building a relationship of trust between yourself and your conscience. Actually, your conscience is part of yourself, but there are many parts of yourself, and you need to be in good relationship with all the different component parts of your own being. And this is nothing to do with your brain. This is all to do with your soul. And I think it's quite a problem for many people because there's no information about souls. And when we study spiritual information, it's all about that. You really learn what these component parts of your being are and how they work together, how they get contaminated and distorted, and how by meditation you bring it back to its rightful resonance, and it's lined up as it should be. So let us have a few moments together of meditation so that you can get an idea how meditation works, you see, because meditation means to think deeply about what's worth thinking about. And your conscience is very, very worthwhile to think about, to come to know, to appreciate how it works, so that you have at your disposal a most trustworthy ally, which is within your own being. So first of all, we have to turn within. Because mostly we operate on the outside of our bodies. We operate through sense perception. We are influenced by what goes on around us, people, places, things. So meditation means go within. Because when your attention is turned within, then you can actually make contact with yourself. That means the energy of your mind is turned upon its own self. Let yourself withdraw from your senses, your eyes, your ears, taste, touch, smell. That's the outside. But on the inside is clarity. your own soul, that point of life, your essence, your being, who thinks and feels through your body. But withdraw from your body so you can feel that you are not your body. Your body is a physical instrument. Go deep inside and feel the essence of your being. There is a pure resonance of peace and love. Purity, clarity. You are a loving, pure being of light. You're not male or female or this color or that color, old or young, healthy or sick. Just a pure being of light. And you're sensitive to right action. Any circumstance comes in front of you, you'll feel what is the right response. Do that. When you're focused within, you awaken your conscience. It lets you know, do this, don't do that. It is alien to be violent. You are naturally right, peaceful, loving. You go into stillness and you feel what's right, what's not right. You feel yourself and a pure resonance between yourself and the divine supreme being who is the essence of goodness. You align with that and you know what is right and what is wrong. You feel it deeply. You know it. Nothing to do with anything external. Comes from your heart and from your soul. And then let yourself reconnect with the everyday world, but keep that sensitivity. Thank you.
Shanti, Sister Denise, as always, excellent talk and presentation. A lot of clarity, but we have some questions, and thank you to those who've posted their questions. You talked about our conscience is asleep, and sometimes we have to fight against the morality of today. How do we awaken our conscience?
This is what I was trying to say, that when you go into meditation and also when you study about spiritual knowledge, it that combination wakes you up and you become sensitive to it, you become aware, and you are more sensitive to the consequences of not doing right. And you want to keep yourself lined up with it. You want to be right with yourself. And the more you do it, slowly, slowly, day by day, the more you're awake and aware. And okay, everybody makes mistakes, but you wake up from those mistakes more quickly and it becomes like part of you, you know?
Is conscience, is it dependent on the level of consciousness, or is it independent?
I would say that it's very connected with the level of consciousness. But then people have different ideas about what that word means. So it might be better to use words like purity or integrity. And integrity is a good word because it means whole and complete, that you're not operating in opposition to yourself. You see, when people are under the influence of external forces, those forces are other, and they are trying to get you to go according to them, and you need to go according to you, because your internal deep self is lined up with a clean, clear, pure conscience, and you're also lined up with the Supreme Being, you're lined up with yourself, and that is the way a meditator likes to be.
We have a question. Is there a difference between discernment and conscience?
Yeah, because conscience is an instrument, and discernment is a skill that you acquire. And of course, both are very subtle, but they're not the same thing.
So just following on from that, another question we have. So what is the connection between conscience and intuition?
Intuition is more connected with the mind and very subtle perception that is not sense perception. And conscience is connected with the intellect, which is about calculation. And a person who meditates, they are purifying both their mind and their intellect, both their intuition and their conscience. And because all of these elements of the soul, they're working together all the time. But to analyze them, we pull them apart. But they don't work independently. And when you develop your conscience, your intuition also develops. Or if you develop your intuition, your conscience develops, because a person needs to be in balance. So all these different components also need to be in balance. But when you start, we're out of balance. This is normal. And as you progress, you become more balanced.
How do we deal with, in a very oppressive world that we live in, where you define morality as an opinion of the majority, but your conscience says, actually, that's wrong. So on one hand, you brought in the aspect of karma. If you do something against the state or the moral values of a particular country or a community, but your conscience says otherwise, how do you deal with that?
Well, it's very difficult because this is the situation of a whistleblower. And there are some famous cases of whistleblowers who were treated appallingly because they show up when people are doing wrong and claiming that it's right, but they find ways to show how even the system of the law of a particular country, it will say this and this and this is allowed, this and this is not allowed, but the authorities are doing what's not allowed and keeping it secret. And if somebody finds out about it and exposes it, then they will prosecute that person because they don't want to be shown up to be wrong. And they want everybody to think that they're right because they're in a position of power. But when you're in a position of power and you go against the principles of spirituality, you're clocking up negative karma, and it ends up a governance that is very oppressive and violent towards the people. And the times that we are going through at the moment are very difficult times. We have a gigantic human population. Lots of people are in survival mode. Lots of people have been traumatized. There's all sorts of conflict that goes back thousands of years, and it's very tangled. So as an individual, you have to play your cards very carefully, because if you are very confrontational, they will just take you out, and then that's a waste of your life or your time and energy. So you need to do what you can in such a way that you can still keep moving forward. From time to time, you may need to take some hits, but you make sure that you still keep going, you see. So this is a balancing act. It's like you're walking on a tightrope. So you need to be very skillful to function in a difficult environment, and still be there. That's a big skill.
We have a point here is that people in this world are going more and more dark. They're going crazy day by day, and it's accelerating. How do you survive in a state where everything is becoming more and more degraded? And how do you keep that stage that you don't get dragged down?
Well, you do have to be strong. And so if you say, okay, what's most important for me is I got to be spiritually strong so that I can manage all of the stuff that is coming along. So we learn in our practice how to be simple, how to, manage in difficult situations, how to live with people that you don't necessarily see eye to eye with. All of these are social skills. And I think it's also good to be very clear with yourself that you will not get into dependent relationships, because if you do, then people have a hold over you, and then you'll have to betray yourself, and then you'll get yourself into trouble, which is a bit difficult to get out of. So you need to be, I think, spiritually, emotionally self-sufficient, socially self-sufficient, skilled so that you can interact with everybody and manage the difficulties that come by your own internal strength. It may even, you have to manage health problems or wealth problems or any kind of thing. But this is why spiritual practice is really helpful, because we learn skills, powers, virtues that are like instruments to help us get across the difficulties with which other people may just not be able to manage.
Okay, we have a comment. Sister Denise, this is one of the deepest talks I have experienced. I need to hear it again. Thank you so much, very much, for the depth of clarity and inspiration. I love how you challenged what we take for granted. I wish you were my supervisor in the charity I created for people with learning difficulties, where I challenge what people continue to assume what they do is correct. People with learning difficulties love when I challenge what they have to accept. They don't struggle with people, etc. So there's a point that's coming across it. If someone is higher than you and you know it's wrong, you mentioned it in the aspect of a whistleblower. What can we do that we can sort of bring people on board rather than antagonize them?
Well, it's a fine line because you have to be able to stand up for yourself and still be diplomatic and still be polite and don't let yourself be put down and pushed around. It's a skill, and I think you learn by doing, you know. And obviously, when you make a mistake and everything goes all wrong, then you kind of go back and review how it happened, what happened, and learn from your mistakes. Or maybe you were too hasty, maybe you were impatient, maybe you were too confrontational, maybe you were not confrontational enough. It's, I think, for me at least, it's a continuous.
Okay, seems to have a sort of a disconnection. We have a technical problem. We hope that we can get Sister Denise back on again. So please bear with us. Denise, welcome back. Just unmute yourself, please. Thank you. Welcome back. Welcome back. If you just unmute yourself, Lassie.
Yeah. Okay, now I have you. Sorry, I think my internet cut out, so I'm sorry about that.
It happens. And now talking about connection, in your meditation, you introduced the supreme being, the divine. How does that help us in keeping our conscience alive and strong?
Well, it's very subtle, but my understanding, my experience of it is that, you know, the Supreme Being is ultra, ultra clean. And we are in process of getting purified by our connection. And so what happens is that any impurities within us, they get precipitated to the surface and expelled. And this can be experienced in many different ways, which are not necessarily pleasant. But if you understand what's going on and you really want to achieve this pure state, then you just keep going and you know, your standards change, you become more vigilant about yourself, less critical about other people. You pay more attention to more subtle aspects of your thought, your feelings, your words, your tone. It's a constant work in progress.
Okay, unfortunately, time is always a prevailing factor. And a lot of comments, really enjoying your talk and your presentation. I would strongly recommend many of you who want to listen to Sister Denise even further, go on to YouTube, type YouTube, and she has this amazing presentation on various topics, a lot of depth. So difficult to cover it in just this 1 hour session. But yes, this is being recorded and it is available. You can get the information. We'll post it onto the chat. But we'll now request Sister Denise to take us into that meditation experience to sort of conclude this session.
Thank you very much. So let us just turn within and just take as much time as you need to turn your attention deep inside, withdraw from sense perception so that you really feel that you're on the inside of your face, beyond your eyes, listening through your ears. You're not your body, you're this extraordinary presence within, a star of consciousness, absolutely pure, clear, quiet, and that is what you are as a soul. So keep yourself soul conscious and be close
Okay, we apologize once again that we seem to have an internet connection from south of France. I hope Sister Denise can join us, but in the meantime, just sit very comfortably, just relax, just let go, and just let go of all the other thoughts and just come into the awareness, I am a peaceful soul, a being of peace, seated on my throne of self-respect, here in the center of this forehead, free from the influences of the past, free from fear, worries. Just accept myself unconditionally. And I appreciate who I am. I am a being of light, a peaceful soul. And I just hold this thought. I am peaceful. Om Shanti. So thank you for joining us, and thank you to Sister Denise, who sadly has been disconnected, but we will convey your gratitude and appreciation to her. So thank you once again. And we do hope that you can join us next week. And next week's talk is Being Free from Past Hurts with Samantha Fraser. Sam is a very sort of experienced meditator,